Well, welcome back to Uncensored from my home in London, where I have COVID, but we're battling on here, as I would expect people to do, even if they're working from home. Joining me now is my packed legal journalist, Ava Santina, and the author, podcast host, and comedian, Konstantin Kisin. Well, welcome to both of you. So, Konstantin, great to have you finally on the programme, because I can finally hold you to account for something that you tweeted to me. I was just curious, really, what you were thinking when you did this, because I tweeted this after a few days of the war. The appalling images and accounts of what innocent Israelis suffered on October the 7th are utterly heartbreaking. And so are the appalling images and accounts of what innocent Palestinians have suffered since then. If you disagree with any part of this, you have no humanity or moral compass. And you replied, the appalling images and accounts of the Holocaust are utterly heartbreaking, and so are the appalling images and accounts of what innocent Germans in Dresden suffered. If you disagree with any of this, you've lost your humanity. And I've got to say, in the moment, I was a bit annoyed by it. And then I thought longer about what you were saying, and I thought you made a very good point. And it's a point that many people, I have to say mainly on the Israel Defense Force side, have made quite forcefully since, which is that if this war was being waged on social media, if the World War II was being waged the same way with social media the way it is, then would the actions of the Allies against German civilians be judged differently? And I think they probably would. I think you're right.
Well, yes, I think I am right, Piers. But also the other thing I would say is I share the moral quandary that you were talking about with Neil Ferguson earlier. Nobody can look at the pictures of what we're seeing from Gaza and be in any way happy about what is happening. But I think if we're being honest, let's look at what the Allies, Britain and the Americans did during the last year of World War II. We dropped more than a Hiroshima a day on Germany for a year non-stop in order to win that war. And I think if you look at it from Israel's point of view, imagine what the equivalent of that would be here in the UK. It would be equivalent of, say, the IRA during the Troubles, invading northern England, killing over 8,000 people, taking 1,000 people hostage. And what do you think Margaret Thatcher would have done? I think we have to be clear about the inability to make a moral comparison between these two while having every bit of compassion for innocent civilians who are caught up in this.
Ava, my whole issue here is, and whenever I talk to anyone from the Israeli government, and I ask them a straightforward question, how many Hamas terrorists are you actually killing? It's pretty clear from their answers they don't know. I mean, they try and feint it a bit and try and make out they know, but they don't actually know. And what we do know from the admittedly Hamas-run health authority, but their numbers are not being contradicted by independent bodies, is that the number of civilians dying is massive. And if you can't provide evidence of how many Hamas terrorists are getting killed, then the moral position that Israel finds itself in terms of public opinion around the world starts to erode quite fast, I think.
Well, the problem that you have there is that Israel and the IDF won't allow journalists to go into the Gaza Strip, and that's also being, aided by Egypt, who also won't allow journalists to cross the Rafah crossing. So it's very difficult to independently verify what is going on the Gaza Strip. But, also back to what you were just talking about there with Konstantin, I would say in terms of the scale, it's very similar to what happened in Dresden, but you would never have that now because we've got the Geneva Convention in place and you've also got the European Court of Human Rights. And those two pieces of legislation should tell us that the killing that is going on in Gaza is absolutely atrocious and is, in violation of international law.
Konstantin, I want to talk to you about Prince Harry. It's not a subject I ever willingly bring up from a sense of personal joy about wanting to discuss him. However, he keeps putting himself back in the news, and he's in court again in London today, demanding to have royal protection whenever he and his family are in the UK, despite quitting the country, quitting royal duty, and spending the last few years trashing the family and the monarchy. Should he be entitled to have royal protection?
Well, actually, even in the court case that is now happening, one of the things that is clear is that he was being offered protection as any high-profile public figure would be in the UK. It was simply not at the level that a working royal would be offered. Piers, you say you don't bring this up willingly. I don't really pay much attention to these people. But I do remember distinctly some time ago them quitting public life and moving on. And since then, all we have seen is them complaining about one thing after another. First, there was the fake racism about the baby. Now it's this, and it just never seems to stop. And it seems to me that they quite enjoy their attention. I know that's a cynical interpretation, but it just seems to me that they can't live without their attention, and they're courting it deliberately.
Yeah, and Ava, you know, I talked with Neil Ferguson about this secondary issue of the way that they tainted with that Oprah interview the entire country via the prism of our figureheads, the royal family and the monarchy, as a bunch of callous racists, when in fact, you know, this is from a historian like Neil, who knows better than most what a racist, intolerant place looks like. And he, you know, by any normal metric, Britain is one of the most tolerant places in the world.
I think that I think you know what you're saying there. You know, you've made a decision that the royal family haven't done anything racist, and there's not going to be any further scrutiny of whether, you know, anyone in the royal family said something to upset Meghan. But look, you know, we were all there for the last couple of years, and the couple of years leading up to their, well, sorry, not a couple of years, but the couple of months leading up to their wedding. We do know how the press treated Meghan Markle, and we do know that there were a lot of allegations made against her that, I'm sorry, they could be called racist. You know, she had a pretty terrible time.
Like what?
Look, I'm not going to go over old accusations. I mean, there was...
Well, name one.
All right,
name one.
OK, so her skin colour was, you know, she was called exotic. That was a pretty racist thing to say. And, you know...
Yeah, that was... Rachel Johnson used that phrase.
Johnson, the reason I don't like bringing that up is because
upset.
Rachel has, you know, corrected that in, you know, the years that followed that. But, you know, there were many... There were accusations levelled at her that were completely unfair. I mean, there was a 2-page spread given to her consumption of avocados.
They weren't racist.
It was totally ridiculous.
Yeah, but they weren't racist. And my point is, if you go back and look at the press coverage on the wedding day, for example, I know I wrote the Mail on Sunday's big piece on it. Everyone was welcoming in this country the idea of a biracial marriage into the royal family.
Not everyone.
There was not a tinge of racism.
Not everyone.
Yes, actually.
No,
pretty
not
much
everyone.
everybody.
That's like
there was
saying
no
that
racism.
all fans of the Premier League aren't racist. And we do know that people who comment on it, you know, all the footballers' Instagrams after every single match do put racist comments on there. But you can make an argument that the Premier League itself is not racist. Look, I think there was a level of introspection that was levelled at Meghan Markle that was totally unfair, totally uncalled for. And no wonder she basically had a breakdown and had to leave the country.
Yeah, I don't think it was that at all. I think she was a very cynical person who decided to hook her claws into Prince Harry as a meal ticket for life, dragged him back to California for the good life in a mansion where they trade off their royal titles for hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think it's despicable. However, we can agree to disagree. Maybe on this one we might find some agreement. Konstantin, this once again, this issue of trans athletes competing in women's sport has reared a very ugly head in terms of what happened in Illinois in a cycling competition, a women's cycling race, where the gold and silver medals were won by 2 biological males identifying as trans women. Now, this is the latest in a long series of these farcical results in women's sport, which are clearly eroding the fairness and equality and integrity of women's sport. And my question is simply, why are we still allowing this to happen? Why are official sports bodies not just banning it completely when there's such an obvious disadvantage to women born with female biological bodies? But secondly, why aren't more women standing up? Is it because the ones who do get crucified at the altar of trans activism?
Well, I hear Ava tutting next to me, so I'm fearful of what I'm about to say. But look, first of all, on the trans women in women's sports thing, we're all looking for the next... I don't know what to say. I mean, it is so obvious. We have had Richard Dawkins on trigonometry, Sharon Davis, the former British Olympic swimmer, detailing bit by bit by bit every way in which men have a physical advantage over women when it comes to physical competition. And by the way, you don't need to be a scientist. You just need to have a brain, look around to know that there is a physical difference between men and women. As for why more women don't stand up, look, first of all, I think we should acknowledge there are many, many very courageous women who have spoken out about this, and I just mentioned Sharon Davis, but I could give you a list as long as my arm. But I do actually agree with you. And I'm not...
J.K. Rowling.
Yes, of course. I generally don't buy into the sort of allegations that men and women are treated differently in lots of different fields. But I do think actually on this issue It is true. Women, I think, are perceived as being slightly more vulnerable. And the very hateful, bigoted trans activists that go after people, especially online, they do seem to target the women more. So I think it's actually on the men and the women in this case, but particularly on the men to stand up and lead in saying this is completely ridiculous and it needs to end.
Okay, Ava, my question for you. When was the last time a trans man competed against biological men and beat them?
I just don't think that we would have that level of introspection. It's probably that journalists aren't trying to hunt out that story because they don't think it's going to make headline news. Look, at the moment...
No, Ava, it hasn't happened. That's why no one's written about it.
Okay, look, at the moment...
No one writes about
currently,
trans men winning against men because they don't beat them.
Piers, at the moment, we are currently, we're currently witnessing the trial of Brianna Gay, who was, a young trans girl who, sadly lost her life. And, we'll have to see what comes out of the court. I can't say too much more on it. But also, a colleague of mine just returned from a young trans boy who'd taken his own life. The way that we are treating trans people in this country is disgusting. There is such a small proportion of them, and I don't understand why we won't leave them alone.
Ava, yeah, but one of the reasons why trans people are getting a hard time is because of this ridiculous defence of the indefensible over the issue of trans athletes in women's sport. It makes an absolute mockery of all trans people. I know trans people who wish this would all just go away, that trans people would stop trying to fight at this ridiculous altar of unfairness and battle for their own fairness and equality.
Because I think
yes,
what
they are.
No,
yes,
I think what they're fighting for is just to be recognised and just to be left alone. It doesn't need to be this headline, media, speculation, insanity all the time. If perhaps the media showed some care for them every other day of the year, then maybe we could have a sensible conversation about sport. Maybe I could, start talking to you normally about perhaps what is going on, with the cycling. But frankly, I don't really care when I know that trans people are taking their own lives every single day.
What about the women who are competing in these sports and who are not getting an opportunity to compete fairly?
We've run out of time, guys. Konstantin, I've loved having you back. Please come back again soon. Ava, always good to have you. We'll agree to disagree. Thank you very much indeed for watching from my home here in London. I suspect I'll be here again tomorrow night and Thursday night from COVID Central. Whatever you're up to.